Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the Book of Eli. Easily one of my top 5 favorite Denzel Washington movies. Because you have other movies like John Q, which is probably my favorite Denzel Washington movie, and then you go on, you have like stuff like Training Day, and the one movie with Denzel Washington and Whitney Houston was pretty good. But yeah, so with that said, that probably wasn't 5, but it is what it is. I'm sure there's probably a movie in there that probably I do like with Denzel Washington, but can't really think of it right this second. So going into this film, you gotta really enjoy the action. The action is really good in this movie. The movie may be kind of eventually at some point like all over the place, but hopefully I'm going to be able, once we get into spoilers, to kind of corral everything and figure all that out. So there is a big reveal in this movie that I think the first time around I didn't catch it at first, but then with like multiple other viewings, I think I could really understand it. Like, oh, okay, like I can understand now, like why there is a big reveal at the end of this film. So, but yeah, but I thoroughly enjoy the action. I enjoy, of course, that we have this kind of post-apocalyptic Denzel Washington movie that kind of has us like feeling like Viggo Mortensen's The Road, or to possibly have like a Mad Max kind of feel, or like Waterworld without the actual water. It kind of feels like this movie also, and maybe I Am Legend a little bit of I Am Legend. So yeah, so with that said, teeing up, what is this movie about? So we have Eli, who is to have this voice in his head one day tell him to go west and to bring with him this Bible, and that he will be protected. So Eli is just supposed to head west to Alcatraz to just deliver this book. While he's to go on that journey, his life is to be consistently at risk, and he is to have to go on and continue to follow the path, and nothing else is of his concern. To not really trust anybody, or to just kind of be on his own and hope no one is going to follow him. Maybe a girl named Solara. So with that said, yeah, I thoroughly just enjoyed this film. Definitely a thumbs up movie. Really, possibly like epic kind of film, just because you can watch it again and again, and it feels really good. Uh, so with that said, yeah, let's just go on into spoilers. Feel like teeing this up and doing all this, like I think I kind of covered all the cryptic stuff that I would to go on and say about this film. So with that said, let's just go into spoilers about this one. Let's kind of quickly, hopefully we'll be able to go on and say everything that we need to say about spoilers. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about the deputy to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this movie, we have Denzel Washington's character Eli, who I guess to be wearing this like gas mask and all of this like gear to try to take down a cat with this bow and arrow. I understand a lot of cat lovers out there, but it's just what happens in the beginning of this film. So kind of just telling us how like desperate the world is right now. So Eli is to go on at the beginning of this film, and like this movie also feels like the Tom Hanks movie Finch, and possibly just a number of other just post-apocalyptic movies. Kind of feels a bunch like that. So we have Eli making his way into this kind of like seemingly abandoned little home, and he is to find a man in this closet who is to go on and hang himself. Eli is to take this guy's shoes and then is to just kind of go on and cook this cat. And it seems that there is to be a rat nearby, and so, or a mouse nearby. And so Eli is like, "Hey, you want this? It's cat." So the mouse takes it and runs off. It's like, "Hey, what do you want for breakfast?" So Eli, after going into this place, is to journey on past this bridge to go on and see a woman with this cart that is to need a wheel. So this girl is desperately begging for help, and so Eli at first is to go on and possibly want to help this girl, but he's like, you know what? Like, this smells all too familiar. So Eli goes on and is to smell hijackers surrounding this place. He's like, well, hey, like, that's the thing about senses. It's like you can now like smell a person really well. So I smell some hijackers. So all of a sudden, the hijackers just come out of their hiding space and like, man, like he can smell from 30 feet away. Wow, that's impressive. So we have this hijacker leader that is to want to tell Eli, hey man, like as he's touching him, he's like, hey, take off your take off your pack, and give it to us. And Eli's like, no, not going to do that. So Eli is also telling this leader, it's like, and if you touch me again, you're going to lose that hand. We go on and we have this leader that is almost to touch this guy again, loses the hand, and he falls over and he's like, hey, kiss him. And they're like, what? And Eli is like, well, yeah, I think he's in shock. I bet he told you to go on and kill me. So Eli's going into the shadows of this bridge. They have all these guys surround him, and we're thinking like, ooh, like he's probably not gonna make it. He's outnumbered, right? Eli goes through ka-slice everybody, kills them all off, and so Eli's going through some of these pockets to find a lighter. He's like, this is gonna work out good. So Eli makes it to this cart girl, and is to look for her water, but it seems that the water that he is to try to smell, he's like, no. Like, so he gives this girl back her water and is to try to walk away. And this girl's like, well, hey, how about I follow you? And he's like, no. Because he's immediately thinking that this girl is probably going to kill him in his sleep. So Eli is to be, of course, listening to this iPod. He's to read this book consistently every day. So Eli goes to this town that is to be run by Carnegie. And before he makes it to this town, he is to meet one of the guys that is in this bar. Because we have a guy named Martz that was to give Carnegie a plethora of books that he is to find on his travels back to this town. Carnegie is to see books like Da Vinci Codes and all kinds of stuff, and none of this is to be the book that he really wants. So, but we had Martz that was to go on while, of course, Eli was watching, or was to be listening on in the distance with Mars killing two people on the road. So we have Eli that is to make it to this bar after going on and giving this part to this engineer shop, and is to offer him wet wipes and a lighter for him to kind of fix this item. So Eli is tempted to just stay by this engineer shop, and the engineer is like, "Well, dude, I'm gonna work on this item for you. Like, it'll be fine. So you should just go on and go to this bar." So he goes to the bar and is to offer like two sets of gloves and this like cloth of some kind. Maybe it's like a hoodie of some kind or something like that. So Eli is to give this bartender these items, and the bartender is to go and give Solara this certain key to go get water, because Eli, of course, is to ask for water, and the bartender's like, "Well, hey, that's the good stuff. Like, I don't know if I can just give you water. I don't know." So all of a sudden, Eli is to see this cat, and so Eli is trying to like shush the cat. And all of a sudden, Martz, who's to realize that Eli was to kind of shush away this cat, Martz is just trying to pick a fight with this guy to just be like, "Well, hey, man, you just pushed my cat." And Eli's like, "Well, I'm sorry, like, this cat was in my way." And so, more and more that Martz and Eli keep talking, the more we're going to realize that this is going to end well. So, Eli goes and takes Mart's head and bashes him against this bar, and then Eli is telling Martz that he's gonna get what's coming to him from what he did, like out by where he saw him kill those two people. So Martz falls over, and all of a sudden Eli is to be surrounded by a number of people that are gonna kill him. So Eli is like, "Well, hey, like, from when there is dust, then there will be eventual dust." And like he has this whole like scripture and stuff like that. He says it way better in the movie than what I'm trying to paraphrase here. But so Eli goes on with his sword again, just slicing through people. We have one time where this head goes flying in the air, and it's really cool, and it's kind of like spinning around and whatever. So like really like another cool action moment that we have Eli just decking all these people, and at one point Solara is to try to stop Eli from killing more people, and so he does. So we have Eli that is to meet with Carnegie, and so immediately like when talking to Eli, it's like, "You know what, like, I don't know like where you got this skill from, but like it's something that I want." It seems like Carnegie is to hire Eli as muscle to go on to some part of land, and Eli's like, "Nope, like that's not my mission. That's not what I want to do." And Red Ridge is saying like, "Well, hey man, like this is like not something you can say no to." And Eli's like, "Well, like, sorry." So Carnegie's like, "Well, just like kind of just sleep it off, just think it over. I'll give you a whole night like on me." And so Eli goes into this room and is to be offered this food by Claudia, which of course he takes. And then Claudia is to mention that Eli probably won't go on and do what this guy wants, and so Carnegie's like, "Well, I'll offer him Solara, and I'm sure he'll probably jump at that." So Solara goes in the room, just kind of a little less than what she would have normally worn. So Eli's mentioned that Solara was the girl that had gotten him water before, and so Eli is like just wanting Solara to leave, and she's like, "Well, hey, like if I don't stay here and do what I need to do for you, like my mother is going to be hurt, like because Carnegie is like controlling my family, and so like if you want, I can just sleep on the floor, and like you can just say that like we had a good night together, and that's it. And Eli's like, okay, fine. So Eli's with Solara going on uh, to of course like break bread together, and Eli is to say grace, and Solara's like, okay, like this is weird, never seen this before. So Eli of course asks Solara about where is their water source, and Solara's like, well, uh like why don't you show me your book? And Eli's like, no, I'm not going to show you my book. And Solaris is like, well, you don't show me your book, I don't show you our water source. So we have at one point where Solara is to take Eli to this water source, and he ends up turning around and leaving her there. And so he ends up leaving her there, and he goes on to get his piece from this engineer shop, and eventually Solaris is coming back into town, telling Carnegie about this book and how it had this symbol on it, this cross symbol. And he's like, oh my god, like this is the Bible, the one book that I've been looking for. So Carnegie is confronting Ellie or Eli before Eli before he leaves town, and so Carnegie is wanting like his men to go on and shoot Eli, but all the bullets are missing him. And so Eli is starting to shoot a certain number of guys, killing them off, while these guys cannot shoot Eli. So Solara, after seeing Eli just dodging all these bullets, it seems that Solara is like, hey, I'm going to go with this guy. Like, there's something about this guy. So Eli goes off and leaves town, and so Solara goes off to follow after she was to go on and say grace with her mother after they were or while they were to go on and eat. And like Solara didn't know how to end the whole grace thing, and so Carney was saying like amen, and that's what kind of led to the whole like book cross thing, is like, oh my god, he has the Bible. So Eli and Solara are both kind of walking together, and Solara is convinced that she needs to go on with Eli, and Eli is just trying to figure out one way or another to ditch this girl. And so at some point, Solara is to go by herself and realize that there is some girl out in the distance who needs some help with this cart. And this girl who needs help with this cart is consistently telling Solara, like, well, no, like, I don't want you to be here. Like, I would rather there to have been a man here. Because all of a sudden these hijackers appear, they try to grab Solara, and again, here's another really cool scene where we have Eli coming in and killing these guys, and then Solara is to grab onto Eli and hug him for coming for her. And so, like, if I were Eli, I would have freaking like killed the girl with the cart. Like I would just be like sick of seeing her. Like every time this girl just keeps getting tied with all these like hijacker guys, and so I would have just been like, "Freaking girl, you are dead to me." You keep going on and being mixed up with all these men, these horrible men. So Eli and Solara keep going on, and even at one point, like Solara is to take a moment and start crying. I guess still from the whole aftermath of that whole scene. So Eli and Solara keep going on, keep journeying west, and so Carnegie is to go on with Red Ridge, and it's to talk about how like very valuable this book is, and that like this book will change everything. We also had the moment where when Martz was to bring these books, he was also to bring a thing of shampoo, and Carnegie was to give Claudia shampoo, and then Eli was to mention to Claudia how good she smelled, and Claudia's like, "Oh, well, it's the shampoo." As if this is like some weird sponsor thing that I think they were going to go on and have after this movie. They were thinking of some kind of products like KFC, I think was like the wet naps. Like, was there some kind of like sponsor from KFC from this movie? I don't remember. Moving on. There should have been. But, anyways, so I just wanted to throw in the whole shampoo thing there for a second. So, getting back to the film. So, we have at some point where Eli is talking to Slara still about this book. And so we have Solara's like, well, hey, I can't read. Like, can you teach me how to read? And Eli just starts going on and telling her a passage from the book, and Solara's like, "Oh, well, like, did you did you write that yourself?" And Eli's like, "Oh yeah, I definitely wrote that myself, like years before even you or I were even a thought." And so Eli was to mention how I guess there had been some people that when things were to go awry and how certain people lost sight during like this whole apocalypse because I guess rays had come down and burnt down half the world and so on and so forth. So and I guess Eli had had some military experience, and so I guess they had gone on and burnt every Bible, and I guess Eli was to keep the only real copy of the Bible to him, and so that's when we get the whole thing about the voice and that Eli had to go west. So we continue to have Eli and Solara that go on to find this one home, and we have both George and we have Martha who are at this house. So Eli and Martha fall into this kind of like hole, and so George and Martha are asking these two, it's like, "Hey, what's your business here?" And they're like, "Hey, man, like we're just wanderers. Like, I'm sorry. Like, we're just kind of here." So we have Martha who's like, "Well, hey, do you want to come in for tea?" And they're like, "Sure. Why not?" So all of a sudden, we have Eli and Solara that are having tea with Martha and George. And as they're drinking this tea, they're like, little rich, a little bit rich, like saying that this tea is freaking awful. And we have Martha who's to like be shaking with her hands the whole time, like she's doing anything. So we have Carnegie that is going on and is trying to track down where Eli is, and so they finally find them out in this house, and so once like all these people are to arrive, we have one moment before they arrive that Eli and Solara are realizing that these two, I guess, are to be cannibalists. because they go out in the backyard to realize a number of people had possibly been killed by them, by these two people, and they're like, oh my god, like these are cannibalists, and like the shakes are because they like eat human meat. And you know how you would go on and see like a number of these like cannibalist like stories where they're to say that like the human like meat is just so much better than anything else, like it's an addiction and so on and so forth. Like I guess that's probably why a person would shake so bad, because I guess not having human meat into their system, like I don't know, I guess does something to them. So but Eli and Solara are to try to get the heck out of there. But then they realize that Carnegie and his men have arrived. So, like, yeah, I guess we should go on and just try to hunker down back to this house. So we go on. We have George, who is to have underneath this couch a plethora of guns. And so they're all going to try to, like, as best they can, put up a pretty decent defense against George and his vehicles and so on and so forth. So we have them just go on, and so we have them just saying like, well, hey, if you just give us the book, we'll let you go. We'll just leave. And so we have Eli, who is to toss out something that is to look like the book, because he's to wrap this towel up in this book, so we naturally assume it's possibly the book. And instead, it's some mine. And so Redridge is to just like toss this mine and run off, and it explodes and it killed some of them. So we go on and we have like all these guys trying to shoot everybody, and it gets to where Carnegie is to have this kind of big, heavy duty, like machine gun, like old fashioned machine gun that is to blast throughout this house, killing George and killing Martha. And so we have Eli that's mentioning that like Solara and him will be alive, and George is like, well, "What about us?" He's like, the voice never told me about you." So so Carnegie still doesn't have the book, and so it just starts to dwindle down to having Redridge bring a bunch of his men into this place, and then Eli and Solara finally surrender here. So we finally go on and have Eli and Solara out there, and Eli has to give up where the book is. And Solara is like having a gun to her head and everything like that, and Redridge is like telling Eli, like, just tell him where the book is. Tell him, just go on, like, for her sake. So Eli says that the book is behind the TV, and so they find it, and they're like, oh yeah, oh my god, this book, yeah, this is great. So Carnegie is to like F off with everything else. I have the book. So Carnegie goes off with this book, and he is to have like Solara with him in one of these other vehicles, but Solara goes on and is to like is to choke the driver of the vehicle, and the vehicle flips, and Redridge is to accidentally have this sword that Eli had stab into himself, and Eli like pulls the blade out, and then he dies on the road, and Solara just turns around and just drives back to get to Eli, who had been shot. So Eli is to fall to the ground. Solara is to make her way back to Eli, and Carnegie is being asked by one of his men, it's like, well, hey, should we just go back for her? Carnegie's like, no, we have the book, who cares? So Carnegie goes all the way back into his town, is to have the engineer open up this book to then realize that the book is in Braille and Carnegie can't read it. And so all of a sudden, Carnegie is having Claudia come in because Claudia should be able to read Braille because she has always been blind. And Claudia is saying, like, well, I'm sorry, like, it's been too long. I can't read Braille. And Carnegie's like, well, no, you have to figure it out. And Claudia's like, no, I'm sorry. Like, and so Claudia is starting to mention to Carnegie how, like, everybody's just starting to ransack and take over this place. And, like, everything that Carnegie is to think that he is to have is to no longer be true. So, realizing at some point that this guy is to soon just be dying off here, because Claudia is also saying that Carnegie is to possibly have an infection, probably from a bullet wound of sorts from his leg, because he's feverish, and so this guy's probably going to die. So Solara is taking Eli and kind of just bandaging up his wound and continue to drive. And so at some point, they are rowing their way to Alcatraz. So they make it to Alcatraz where there's a number of snipers there. And so Solara and Eli are to meet a guy named Lombardi, who I guess is to be the guy of books, I guess. So we have Eli offering this guy, of course, this Bible. And so Lombardi is to mention that he is to soon have a printing press, possibly together, to start churning out all these books. And so Eli is to offer him the Bible. And Lombardi is like, well, like, what condition is it in? And Eli is to say, it's like, well, it's a little beaten up, but I'm sure, like, I can give it to you. So what Eli is to give to Lombardi here is his brain, because Eli was to have read this book over and over and over again, to the point of him being able to memorize it, like memorize every bit of it. And so Eli is to go on and give Lombardi the whole entire book because he had memorized it so well. And so I'm like, man, that is like brilliant. Like, it's lucky that, like, even when somebody was wanting this book, that Eli didn't need it because he had it all up here. And so I was like, man, that was so cool. So Eli was to go on and rattle off the whole Bible to Lombardi, and Lombardi eventually went on and print pressed the Bible. And at some point, Eli was to go on and die. And so after that, we had Solara, who decided to go off on her own. And, like, what would have been the sequel to this? The Book of Solara? I don't know. Like, I don't think they would have been able to make a sequel. And if they did, I think it would have been interesting. But, like, we would have still had it to where, like, I don't know if we could have really gone on and had, like, Solara, like, give us an interesting enough sequel. Like, where would this go? Like, it would just be that she would have to, like, seek revenge on a number of people. I don't know. It would, like, she would probably have to go and get her mother and then go off on her own adventure. And I don't know, would people have been accepting of a sequel to this film? Not quite sure. But at the end of the day, I think that is to be all of the Book of Eli. Uh, Surprising because I thought it was going to take a heck of a lot longer than that. If there was stuff that wasn't exactly correct about this review, like I tried like talking about this before and I got certain scenes confused because there was just a lot of stuff, a lot of small pieces to try to puzzle back together. And so, with that said, like the review is what it is. And so, with that said, yeah, I don't think I can do it any better than that. So let me know in the comments below how you felt about the Book of Eli. Really, a really interesting and good Denzel Washington movie. But I think I'm just gonna get the heck out of here so I can go on and get some rest because this is way later than when I would normally be awake, up, and whatever. So with that said, I think I'm just gonna get out of here so I can go on and hopefully get prepared for whatever tomorrow is going to be for a review. So with that said, goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.